First communicants, the day has finally arrived. My dear children, the day of your first communion is finally here. And this is big. This is like huge. On the day of your first communion, whatever prayer you pray, God will answer it. On the day of your first communion, whatever you ask God for, God will give you. That's how big this day is. Now, moms and dads and grandparents, we know how tricky this praying is that we do. I mean, you deal with your children or your grandchildren, and you're hoping that when they come to you asking for something, that you can actually give it to them, that it's possible, right? Because you don't want to give them anything that's not good for them. And you would certainly like it when they came to you with a request that it would be something that they would really need, just not something that they would want. And I bet that tucked away in your heart someplace there's a little corner that you're hoping, and it's not necessary for you to give to your children and your grandchildren what it is that they need and what's for their good, but there might be a little corner in your heart that's just hoping that maybe that they will say thank you. All right. It's the same for God, isn't it? We make our prayers, we give God something that's possible. We assure Him that it's something that we need and not just something we want. And we let Him know that we have the intention and the inclination to give Him thanks no matter how it is that our prayer is answered. Now, for the first communicants, on the day of your first communion, God will give you whatever you ask for. I never heard this said about the prayer of parents at First Communion, or grandparents, or godparents, or aunts and uncles and cousins, and anybody else who happened to stop in on the Sunday Mass and found First Communion's going on, or the priest giving the children their First Communion, but why not? I mean, this day's big. This day is huge. And if God can make Himself be put into the hands of little ones, what could be too big for God to do? So ask God for something big. Possible, but big. Good for you, but big. With the intention to give God thanks, no matter what the answer happens to be. Anyway, back to the first communicants. There was, several years ago, and this is a true story, it's factual. I can give you names and places. It actually happened. A little girl at First Communion was told by the priest that whatever she asked for on the day of her First Communion, she would get. This little girl was at her First Communion without her mother because her mother had died. Okay. Now, what's the prayer of the First Communion? What was the prayer of the little girl, do you think? Do you know what she prayed for? You know, you don't know how the minds of little ones work, but, I mean, wouldn't she first have thought, say, you know, I want my mom back? And I don't know what she was all thinking, but could it have been that maybe she thought, well, you know, Mom's in heaven, and I know that getting people back from heaven doesn't usually work, and one day I'm going to be with her in heaven, so maybe we'll just leave her where she is and I'll eventually get there. But so I have no idea how the little mind was working and how it was all, how the mind was strategizing and whatever else. But I do know, and this is a fact, I do know that the prayer of the little girl at her First Communion, remember the prayer that she would make, whatever she asked God on the day of her First Communion, God would give her. What she asked for on the day of her First Communion was a new mom. Her father wound up marrying her second grade teacher. That is a fact. Now, it's either true then that on the day of First Communion, the first communicant gets whatever it is that he asked for, whatever she asks for. Or that little girl was one mighty good prayer, or a rather effective matchmaker. I'm not sure which one. But pray for something. I think that if we were to be able to get into the minds and the hearts of these first communicants and to hear what prayers that they're praying, I bet we would be surprised. We might be delighted. And we might be saddened even. But what we do hope, what we do pray, is that God will today hear each of their prayers. That God will give them what they need. And maybe even what they want. But that most of all, that God would hear the prayer of each and every one of the first communicants. And that they would be grateful that God gives them whatever they need. All right, you came here for your first communion, and you're real excited. There are two people. There are two people here that are just as excited as you are for you to make your first communion. One of them is me. See, because I don't have to look at your eyes anymore at Mass. When you come up here and you look at me with those eyes saying, please, today, I mean, a blessing is nice, but it's not like First Communion, right? So I am one person that's just as happy for you to receive your First Communion as you are. And do you know who the second one is? The second person is not only as happy as you are to receive First Communion, but this person is even happier than you are to receive First Communion. And that's Jesus. As much as you want to receive communion, and as much as I want to give you communion, even more, Jesus wants to come to you in communion. And that's what makes this day really big. I mean, like, this is huge.